Happy Friday. John Lorden here. Thank you so much for joining me on another episode of BrainScratch. Before we get into the mystery of who is Princess Blue, I just wanted to stop and take a moment to thank all of you, every person that has subscribed. Thank you so much. I know we hit 100,000 subscribers a little while ago, but this finally showed up. It is proudly hanging on my wall, keeping me motivated and pushing forward and all this. And I know at times it's very easy for us YouTubers to complain about business with YouTube, and sometimes it can be very challenging. But this was certainly a highlight of the work that I've been doing over the past several years. And sometimes you feel like they don't keep their promises, and it's really nice when you see something like this where they do. And it just kind of makes all those hardships a little more worthwhile. So thank you to all of you that are watching, and also thank you to YouTube. Really appreciate you guys. All right, so today's case, who is Princess Blue? You know, it's not often on the show that I go into unidentified body cases. They're usually pretty tough for me to cover because there's not a whole lot of information to go into, but every now and then I hit one where the story just has to be told. This is one of those cases. It's a case that has been picked up by investigators after years of it being cold. Of course, I want to highlight that. You've got people that care and are really trying to push this case forward. It's also a case that has really been taken on by the internet sleuth community over the past 12 years in particular. And it really motivates me when I see stories like this that so many people care about, so many people are working on. A big shout out to web sleuths, of course, but there's been several different threads that I've come across as I've been researching today's case. So I really appreciate being part of a community that cares about people like this, even if you don't live in the same state or sometimes don't even live in the same country. So let's go ahead and jump into today's case, starting at crimewatchers.net, which, by the way, is one of the places where I found a pretty excellent thread that included a bunch of news articles that are no longer available. So thank you to the wonderful users at crimewatchers.net. This is from an article the Houston Chronicle published on September 14th, 1990. The title, Remains Those of Woman. Manville. Human skeletal remains found near here are those of a young white or Hispanic woman between the ages of 16 to 22, Police Chief Tommy Tolson said Thursday. The skeleton was found Monday by someone looking for bottles and cans near a private trash dump on County Road 101, about a quarter-mile east of Texas Highway 288. The dead woman had a silver ring with a turquoise unicorn on her right hand and a pearlescent bead-type bracelet on her right arm, authorities said. The Harris County Medical Examiner's report also concluded that she had knee problems, Tolson said. Tolson asked that anyone with information about the woman's identity call Manville Police. Of course, we're still looking for answers in this case, so there is new contact details in the description box below. But this is a lot of the time when I'm looking into an unidentified person's case, this is about as much detail as you find. And I've looked into some cases where people really focus on jewelry in particular. And here it looks like we have, Chief Tolson trying to use the press to get out the information about an important piece of jewelry, a turquoise unicorn that is a silver ring, and then, of course, a bracelet. However, we're going to find out that's not all the jewelry. And of all the jewelry, is that one really the most important one in terms of finding an indicator of who this person could possibly be? Buckle up, everyone. There's a few twists on this one as we go through all the information, but let's learn a little bit more about Manville. Manville is a city in Brazoria County, Texas, United States. Texas State Highway 288, a 4-lane freeway, runs through the northwest part of Manville, leading north 20 miles to downtown Houston. So you get a bit of a sense there how close it is to Houston. And also Highway 288, of course, is important because her body is essentially found just a little bit off of that highway. But something else to notice here, back in 1990, the population there was only 3,733 people. Currently, they're estimating it to be over 11,500. So a bit of a population boom that seems to have happened primarily over the past 10 years. But when we're looking at cases, any unsolved cases, and we're dealing with communities of this size, it just really strikes me about, well, didn't someone know her? Isn't someone missing her? Isn't there a missing persons report that you can easily match up to this? But keep in mind, this is just where her body's found. We don't know where she's from originally, and you've got a big metropolitan area called Houston not too far away from this. So we're really dealing with a much larger number than it seems based off the simple population demographics here. As we usually do on Searchlight, we're going to go to NamUs because NamUs doesn't only keep track of missing persons, they've got a whole other database, which is the Unidentified Persons database. And here we do have an entry for Princess Blue. And in an interesting turn, usually you might see a drawing or like a composite sketch of the person, an artist's recreation of what they may look like in the picture. And here we have a ring, but it's not any ring that's been described, at least so far in that first article we read. Let's go through the basics of this case together. So we're talking about a female, and here it's listed as white Caucasian or Hispanic Latina. Estimated age range 15 to 19. Estimated year of death 1990. Now, most things I'm reading are saying they expect that she probably died within a year of her being found. We know that she's found September of 1990, but it's also skeletal remains. So sometimes it can be tough to actually estimate how long before that the death actually occurred. But in several articles I'm seeing they're estimating somewhere between 6 months to 1 year. For height, they have her listed at 5 feet tall. For weight, they cannot estimate. We're going to find some information that might help us with that a little bit or might open up some more questions for this case as we roll forward. Date the body was found September 10th, 1990, and here's the circumstances of recovery. Skeletal remains of an unknown white or Hispanic female found in wooded area under trash pile. Estimated date of death is 6 months to 1 year. Located at dump site off County Road 101 and Highway 288 near Manville, Texas. Jewelry includes a 1975 Robert E. Lee High School ring with blue stone and a white gold ring with turquoise unicorn, possibly referred to as Princess Blue. So where is this 1975 class ring? How come that wasn't mentioned in the original article? I don't know. When we hear about an item like that, all of a sudden my mind just goes to, well, wait, you're talking about a class ring for a specific year. You've just narrowed your pool down of potential people that could be related to her. Now, we have a little bit of a problem in that, of course, the class ring is for 1975, and we're talking about someone that was 15 to 19 years of age in 1990. So is it her class ring? Certainly not. We know it's not her class ring, but she's wearing someone else's class ring. Wouldn't it be important to identify that person? Perhaps that person knows her. Maybe the person gave it to her. Maybe she's even related to that person. So why that information didn't come out in the original articles kicking around on this, I don't know. The turquoise unicorn, from what I've seen people talking about in threads, much more common, kind of a cheaper jewelry item, not very hard to find. There's probably a lot of those out there. But for a specific 1975 Robert E. Lee high school ring that has a blue stone in it, because they actually offered different stones for that ring, so that kind of narrows it down even further. You've got something very specific about that. We're going to learn there's a few other specific indicators on it. Why that information didn't go out originally, I don't know. So let's get back to it. Conditions of remains, not recognizable, but they do have the near complete or complete skeleton. Physical description, something that's unfortunate here is we don't have a hair color. I believe that she was out in the elements for a prolonged period of time, and it seems like her body was disarticulated even when they found her. With that, it seems that all the hair has been lost. And that's unfortunate because even just a small grouping of hair could give us a strong indicator of what her hair color was, or if she used dyes in it, things of that nature. Unfortunately, we have none of that information. Something else that's missing is a clothing description. No clothing description that's given. It's like they literally found the skeletal remains and jewelry. But for jewelry, there's actually other items. Let's go through it all together. Several rings, a yellow band with 6 clear stones. They actually have a picture of it right here. Probably not completely unique, but just another possible indicator. We've got 2 white colored bands. They actually don't have pictures of those here, but I believe they're just simple like white gold bands. We've got a white colored band with a scroll pattern, and that is this one here. I know it's a little hard to see at that size. Keep in mind we're dealing with an older case, so some of these photos are a little low resolution. And then, of course, we've got the 1975 Robert E. Lee High School ring, which we've got a few photos of here. Let's take a look at that together. You can see the blue stone, and it's kind of hard to see this, but actually etched into the top of the blue stone is the letter L, and that's something that web sleuths have been kicking over for years. Is that possibly an initial of the person that originally bought this ring, or is that L just there for the Robert E. Lee High School in Houston, which is where the ring is from? L, of course, standing for Lee. But let's take a look at another side of it. On the 75 side, you can see there's actually a depiction of Robert E. Lee. And there's one other side of it, but unfortunately they don't have a picture. Oh, they do have one of it here, but it's upside down. I've already turned it right side up for you guys. I've also tried to increase the exposure because the original picture was kind of dark. We can see that we've got the 1 and the 9 for 1975 here. There is a squirrel that is on a nut of some kind. I was hoping that there might be some type of I know sometimes with class rings you can get certain things stamped on them. Like if you're part of the drama club, you might get the comedy and tragedy masks. It doesn't look like it's anything quite that unique. It just looks like it's more imagery for the school and their mascot. But that's about all that we can get from the ring at this point. What's interesting to me here is, and I don't deal with these types of cases a whole lot, but they're saying NCIC here. And of course, NCIC is the National Crime Information Center database. It is basically, even here at FBI, they're referring it to as the lifeline of law enforcement, an electronic clearinghouse of crime data that could be tapped into by virtually every criminal justice agency nationwide, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. So I'm wondering if this is data from the NCIC entry. I think it is. That's probably why they've written it in this way. But if we look at this data, it's talking about the 2 thin white gold bands, the white gold band with the scroll design, the yellow gold band with the 6 clear jewel stones, and the pearl bead bracelet, which actually we don't even have a picture of here. But it's also not mentioning the 1975 Robert E. Lee High School ring. And that is making me wonder. We've already got the chief not talking about it to the press, something that I think is a pretty identifiable object. Is he doing that for a particular reason? Is he trying to hold out on that information so that if they get a suspect in their sights, they can kind of spring that on him in some way? I'm just curious why it wouldn't have been entered into the NCIC database. And that makes me wonder, are we dealing with something else here? Was there possibly some reason why that piece of pretty identifiable information didn't come out clearly at the time, might not even be in the centralized database for this case? Let's just keep that in mind as we continue looking through this stuff together. At Wikipedia, we're going to learn an additional detail. The class ring, which was upsized twice to a size 9, is not believed to have originally belonged to her, as it predated the period when she would have graduated from high school. So knowing that it was upsized twice could mean a few different things. I mean, it could be that the original owner gained some weight and wanted to keep wearing it, so they decided to have it upsized, and then later they did the same thing. It could also mean that the ring has been handed off from that person to someone else. Someone else wanted to wear it. It wasn't the right size, and they've got it increased. So it doesn't necessarily, I think, really help us in terms of a determination of, is Princess Blue very closely related to the person that actually originally purchased the ring? But certainly an interesting detail, and it at least leads me to believe that someone really cared about this ring for some reason, either to keep it around more, or someone that received it as a gift really wanted to be able to wear it. One interesting point made by a commenter in one of the many threads that I've read on this is perhaps she bought the ring at a thrift store or something like that, specifically because it said 1975. The age range certainly puts her close at the possibility of being that age. So something else to kind of keep in mind. Let's continue with another article at Wikipedia about the high school. And the high school is now known as Margaret Long Wisdom High School. It's not very popular to have Robert E. Lee imagery around in this country any longer. So Robert E. Lee High School, actually around the year 2000, I guess, they kind of stopped referring to themselves as Robert E. Lee High School, and they just called themselves Lee High School. And then later they had a teacher that had worked there that passed away, and they renamed the school after her. It's in Southwest Houston, Texas. And also interesting to point out, there's another Robert E. Lee High School, or at least it used to be called that is in San Antonio, Texas. So we've got 2 Robert E. Lee High Schools just in this area, and that has caused a little confusion with certain people that have looked into this. That one has now also been renamed. I think it's called Legacy of Educational Excellence, LEE. So even though they renamed it, they still kind of kept the reference to Lee in there. But let's see. So Robert E. Lee High School in Houston is a public admission school that enrolls grades 9 through 12, ages 14 to 19. Their colors, at least currently, are black and gold, and their mascot is a general. I think that's, just a holdover from a General Robert E. Lee, of course. So I was just curious about that because of the blue stone. I wanted to know, did the blue stone actually tie perhaps to the school colors? It doesn't. Something else that people talk about is the possibility that it was a representation of a birthstone. So blue could possibly be September. I think there's a lighter blue that's also used for December. So another possibility when it comes to that color being picked in particular. The school symbol is the Lee family coat of arms, which has a squirrel on the top holding a nut. And that is why I showed you that picture earlier. When I first saw the picture of the photo, I hadn't come across that information yet. And I'm like, is that a squirrel on top of a nut? And indeed it is. In 1989, Robert E. Lee was featured on the Geraldo Rivera Show as an example of an outstanding high school. Geraldo interviewed students who created SWAT, Students with a Target, a group of students who volunteered during lunch to peer counsel other students facing issues. Just on a little bit of a personal note, I was also a peer counselor. It's probably one of the most rewarding things that I feel like I did in high school. Maybe definitely the most rewarding thing. The other big thing for me, of course, was video production, which is still a love of mine. But from here, the school kind of takes a turn into the 90s and 2000s. It looks like things aren't going too well. They start having an extremely high dropout rate. They try to bring in some programs to kind of curtail that stuff. However, it seems like things have kind of turned back around. Newsweek ranked Lee High School among America's best high schools on their list. And then, of course, they changed the name. That only happened in 2016. So that is just a real brief history of at least the school that's attached to the ring. We could also see here that we've got Houston, we've got County Road 101, which is where she is found, and then Margaret Long Wisdom High School. So from the high school, if you're driving directly from there to approximately where she's found, which she was actually found much closer to the road, but we're talking about 25 miles. Now it looks like a thriving neighborhood and there's businesses all over the place. But at the time that this happened, there was literally just a little offshoot from the highway here that just ended. And at the end of that, it looks like people were kind of using it as an informal dumping area for their trash. And apparently someone also used it as a dumping area for her. That raises an important point for me because when I think about that, the fact that she was dumped at a location like that, it makes me wonder what's the possibility that she actually lived in this area. And I think that actually lowers it quite a bit. We've got her wearing a ring that could be a relative of hers, but maybe not. In a minimum, even if she did buy it at a thrift store or something along those lines, probably much easier for her to have come into contact with that ring in the Houston area. So perhaps this person knew that area specifically for using it as a dump of traditional waste or household waste. And when they wanted to dispose of her, took her to that particular area. I'm kind of wondering along those lines. Could it be a person that lives in that area? Certainly. But is she from that area necessarily? I don't know. I feel like if you're looking at this thing in terms of statistics, I think she's closer to Houston, or at least living in Houston around the time that this happened. And that's another possibility. What if she is someone that is from a different part of the country altogether and she moved here at that point, was born in 1975, saw that ring, thought it'd be cool to be wearing it, bought it from a pawn store or a thrift shop? There's certainly some possibilities where the linkage is not necessarily that strong. But when I think about a community of 3,000 people and I think about that information hitting the news like that, I'm pretty sure a lot of that community was very aware of that case. And for no one to step forward and say, hey, yeah, I know a 17-year-old that went missing, and yeah, I know that she had that kind of jewelry. It just leads me to believe that she's probably likely from a different part of Texas than that particular area. But that's just my opinion. Let's continue at unidentified.wikia.org. And here we can see eventually a composite is drawn of her. I kind of wish NamUs would update and use this instead of the ring, because the connectivity to the ring, it's not like a guaranteed thing. An artist actually took images of her skull, recreated what she believes Princess Blue to look like. I just think that might be more solid information. And quite honestly, we're also going to hear in the details here that she might not be Hispanic at all. But characteristics. Princess Blue had several untreated cavities. She may have had a tumor on one of her knees, I think on the backside, if I remember correctly. There were no traceable drugs in her system. A little curious about that because the only information I've seen comes from a supposed autopsy report. It's basically a reprinting of this autopsy report. And it looks like the only thing they actually tested her for was opiates. But I'm seeing so many summaries where they're saying there was no traceable drugs in her system. That's a little different than they specifically tested her for opiates and didn't find that. But 2 of her ribs were fractured. She did have fillings in her teeth, 2 fillings in particular. She also had an upper left tooth that appeared to have been surgically removed. So something that web sleuths have been theorizing about this as well is it seems like at some point she was getting decent dental care, and then later it stopped. It's saying that she had several untreated cavities at some point. So it's one of those things where you wonder, is this someone that was in a family structure? Maybe the family split up and then, she was with one parent and all of a sudden she wasn't getting to the dentist as often. Or another possibility, are we looking at a runaway, maybe someone that even fell into sex work or something along those lines? There's all kinds of different possibilities, but there's some indicators here that, at some point she was taking really good care of her teeth, and at some point it seemed like that had stopped. Now here they also list a theory. The class ring may have belonged to a much older boyfriend or a family member. And in the threads I've been looking through, this has been a big point of contention. I've literally looked through years and years of dialogue where people are kicking back and forth. Is this ring a boy's ring? Is it a girl's ring? I believe it is pretty strongly a girl's ring. And there's even some people that say, hey, back in the 70s, it wasn't like now where you have two very distinctly different styles of ring for males and females. You know, the male ones are the stone is quite a bit larger. The band is quite a bit thicker. You can get all kinds of other art that goes all the way around it. Generally, the female rings are thinner, particularly when they get to the band. The stone can be a lot smaller. We're going to get into some details that pretty much call out I believe it's a female ring. I don't think there's too much to debate about that once we hit the sources that actually explain that for us. But continuing at a website that says it's the true ghost tales of Brazoria County, brazoriacoghost.weebly.com. This is a write-up also on Princess Blue. I'm a tad disappointed that the author seems to be someone that worked so hard on this case, and then there's kind of this paragraph at the end that spins this into a ghost story thing. I just don't think it needs it. I think there's plenty of people that care about this case enough to look into it without having some, if you drive along the highway at night, you might see her angle to all this. And I think it kind of cheapens the reality of what's going on here. This is a person whose life was tragically ended, likely, and left in a horrible situation in terms of where she was dumped. People that care about her are probably missing her. There's a lot of realities here that, quite honestly, this like ghost story aspect, I think it takes away something. But it is clear to me this person actually worked very hard to try to identify her. A few years back, I became involved in trying to give an unidentified woman her name back. The Houston Press did an article on her case based on the efforts of some wonderful people and myself. What intrigued me about this particular case was the class of 1975 Robert E. Lee high school class ring that was on her finger. Myself and others used the Robert E. Lee High School 1975 yearbook that we purchased to harvest names of students who might have owned that class ring. After many hundreds of letters were sent out and countless telephone calls to the investigators in Brazoria County, Texas, she still has no name. Out of respect for her and the desire to give her a real name, we called her Princess Blue. So one mini question that we've had throughout this whole thing, how did she even come to this name of Princess Blue? We have an answer. It really came from the web sleuth community that was looking to try to help identify her, and they based it off the stone in the ring. And that information doesn't come out until about 2006 or 2007. We're talking 16 to 17 years after she was actually found. All of a sudden, that information about the ring and the stone comes out. And we're going to get into more details when we swing back to news stories on this. But at this website, she's also posted the autopsy report. It gets a bit technical. Of course, I don't want to read through the whole thing with you guys, but if you want to see it, just look for the link down below that says brazoriacoghost.weebly.com. The autopsy was performed by forensic pathologist Eduardo Bellis, MD. Natural teeth in good condition, in part, and some in bad condition were observed. 22 ribs were submitted. The right first rib, along with the second right rib, showed a hairline fracture. So we've got some fractured ribs there. One other thing that was noted in here, I don't think I highlighted it. It might come up in another article later, but the hyoid bone, which is a bone that is frequently broken that's in the neck if someone has been strangled, was actually complete and not broken. So strangulation does not seem to be, there's other ways where a person might be strangled that the hyoid isn't broken, but it's a very common thing to happen. It didn't happen in this case. Lab results, opiate, bone marrow, negative. So that's the only lab result that I've seen, like I said, and it's only a test specifically for opiates. Opinion, it is my opinion that the cause and manner of death of the decedent, unidentified skeletal remains of a Hispanic female, is undetermined. And this picture does a little bit of a better job of seeing in the stone where you can kind of see the L was. I believe that it might have been painted in with gold. It's being referred to as a gold inlay. So I think it was kind of etched into the stone and then gold was painted in there, but it's probably come out a bit, and that's why it's kind of difficult to see. Some people that were looking into this case say, hey, I keep seeing that this thing was customized with an L, and I've looked at pictures all around this ring and I can't find the L. It's literally in the actual stone. So let's head over to the Houston Chronicle at chron.com. Ring on skeleton's finger, top clue in cold case. This is a very important detail to me because when I'm thinking about a case like this, we already know that this is a trash dumping area. So isn't there a possibility that the ring could have wound up there with her remains and just be completely not related to this case at all? This article specifically says the rings were found on the skeleton's fingers. And I'm seeing several different references that say that. I'm not finding anything like that I would consider official that states that. So I'm still a little bit on the fence about it. But this is an article that was posted September 2nd, 2006. It's not much to go on, said Manville Police Detective Jay Kaufman, but it's about all we've got. In the years since the remains were found, investigators have not been able to tell what happened to the female victim, how she got to be on a pile of debris, or, more importantly, who she was. Richard Rosser, an investigator with the Brazoria County Sheriff's Department, is working with Kaufman to solve the mystery. Back then, Brazoria County was a dumping ground for bodies of people killed in Houston, Rosser said. It seemed like we had at least one a month. Investigators looked at dozens of different reports of missing teenage girls, but none seemed to match the skeleton. A jeweler recently told investigators the ring was a size 9.5, so that's a little different than we heard before, and had been resized twice. The person it fit was probably about 175 pounds. Kind of hard to estimate that. I've heard a lot of people talking about this in the threads. Some people are like, hey, I weigh a lot more than that, and I'm able to wear a ring that size. Other people say I weigh a lot more than that and I wear a ring a lot smaller than that size. So I don't know that you can make a strong determination. But typically, once you're getting up to about size 9, just kind of on average, that's starting to get close to sizes that men would wear. So I suppose there is that possibility. It could be that this ring was handed down from a mother to her son. Maybe the son started dating this girl, gave it to her as a gift or some type of promise ring or something like that. There is some potential that despite the fact that this seems to be a lady's ring, maybe it getting to Princess Blue is still through the path of a man. Now, if we do think of a foul play scenario, it'd be pretty silly, I think, for someone to try to pull off a crime like this and leave such an identifiable piece of jewelry, something that you gave her in particular, something that has, just marks that could be so easily traced. So I don't know if that's really what we're looking at here, but an ornate L inlaid in the blue stone could have stood for the owner's last name or for Lee High School. The company that made Lee High School's rings doesn't have records from 1975, Rosser said. Now, one of the frustrating aspects looking at this case is kind of related to that point that he just made. If this was looked into in 1990, if someone would have contacted the company that made the rings, is there a chance that they could have actually found those records and used that as a list to start drilling down to find people that might be related to the ring? Unfortunately, you've got Rosser working on this 16 or 17 years after she's been found, and she's found 15 years after the ring has been made. 30 years later, trying to go back and find those records is much different than 15 years later. So I'm curious if the original people that were working this case even tried to reach out to that company at all. It's strange because the notes that Rosser got, essentially when he started looking into this case, he said that there just wasn't much there. So I get the feeling that they probably didn't investigate that, or if they did, the records were destroyed for some reason. I don't know why they would be, but let's continue with another article. This one comes out June 2007. Texas Department of Public Safety hope new developments will help identify skeletal remains. 2 new forensic drawings of the victim's possible appearance with either short or long hair were developed from the victim's skull by a Texas Ranger forensic artist. And both those photos are here on the left. You can see the one with the shorter hair, and then right below that, the one with the longer hair that we saw over on the other website. The University of North Texas System Center for Human Identification in Denton recently performed an extensive forensic analysis. I believe University of North Texas is also where NamUs is actually located, but this news story predates the start of NamUs, I think, just by a year or so. Originally thought to be Hispanic in 1990, new forensic analysis indicates the young woman was Caucasian with the probability of some African American traits. According to the forensic analysis, it is likely one parent or one grandparent was African American. Her age at the time of her death was determined to be between 17 to 21 years old. Her height was between 4'11" and 5'3", with a slight to medium build. So it's interesting. We get kind of stronger details. We're now hearing she's not Hispanic, and that's actually happening with analysis from University of North Texas. So I'm curious why the NamUs profile still actually lists her as Hispanic there. But on top of that, we're hearing with a slight to medium build, and we're talking about a ring that supposedly might have fit someone about 175 pounds. It's only standing at about 5 feet tall. I don't think you would consider that a slight build. Maybe it could be considered a medium build. Just a lot of questions with this. No clothes were found with the remains, according to this article. A person with a missing family member matching all or part of this description and timeline should also contact authorities. A DNA test from a living relative could be used to identify the woman. I believe her remains at this point are actually at the University of North Texas. I don't know if they currently still are, but I mean at the point that this article was written. Another interesting point is no clothes being found with the remains. Now, I've looked into enough cases to know that sometimes the clothes will be taken. Animals and other environmental factors can essentially get rid of the clothing. So is that what we have here? Or is there some possibility that she was actually nude when she was taken out to that spot and left? One thing that's interesting is no shoes would have been found. And I think shoes kind of hold up a little bit differently than traditional clothing. I could think of a shirt or something, kind of being taken by the elements, let's just say. But shoes, especially the soles of shoes, that's a little bit of a different story. Of course, there are animals that could drag that type of item away as well. But it just really leaves me with the question of, was she actually clothed when she was taken to that spot? Now, you guys know I love to call out great journalists when I find them, and for the Houston Press, we have Craig Malisow that wrote up an extremely good piece. If there's only one article that you guys read after watching today's video, make it this one. It goes into a lot more of the web sleuth thing than I want to actually get into on today's video. This video is already starting to look like it's going to run long. It also goes into the possibility of a kind of regular suspect, a guy in the area that was known to assault young women. It looks into him a little bit as well. I don't know enough about this case to really pull him in for the sake of this conversation, but if you want to hear about those details, check out this excellent article from the Houston Press. There are some points that I do want to share with you guys from here, though. The man had pulled over to relieve himself. First of all, I don't know if you guys remember, but the first article that we looked at on this said he actually stopped to look for bottles and cans. That's the only article I've seen that actually says that. Everything I've seen after that says that he was pulling over to essentially use the restroom. So this article goes the same way. He had pulled over to relieve himself. He thought he spotted an old bottle. He wound up nearly stumbling into bones. It was September 10th, 1990, about 5 p.m. Once home, he told his wife about the bones. They decided to call the Brazoria County Sheriff's Office, which notified the Manville Police Department, a small unit working out of a trailer behind City Hall. The case wound up in the hands of Chief Tommy Tolson. Tolson found no purse, wallet, clothing, or hair around the skeleton, but there, on her finger bones, so once again we're hearing that detail, were the rings and a bracelet around her wrist. He removed the jewelry and placed it in an evidence envelope. According to a brief Houston Chronicle article that ran 3 days later, that's the one that we started this video with, Tolson characterized the girl as Hispanic or white. He said she wore a silver ring with a turquoise unicorn on her right hand and a beaded bracelet on her right arm. The article did not mention the biggest ring, the silver one with the sapphire stone. August 2006, when the case was reopened, investigators found an incredible clue in that evidence envelope. Surrounding the sapphire stone on the big ring were the words Robert E. Lee High School, Houston. Below on the band itself was the date 1975 and a portrait of the school's namesake. Tolson was out of law enforcement by the time the existence of the ring was released to the public. So when we do get to 2006, 2007, and we have a new investigator start looking into this, the guy that was originally processing this case, completely out of it. And he was a chief. Now, I have to imagine for that area, you're talking a community of only 3,000 people. His department might have been a few guys, but he was the acting chief at that time. An online sleuth called the Angleton Public Library seeking information about Princess Blue. The reference librarian who took the call found it strange, so the librarian called the Brazoria County Sheriff's Office, and her suspicion was delivered to the desk of investigator Richard Rosser. The woman that called, the online sleuth, left her phone number. He tried reaching back out to her. Eventually, she called him back, told him she had nothing to do with the case. It was just natural interest. That kind of set it off, Rosser recalls. He pulled what little information was with the sheriff's office. So even Rosser kind of getting back into this with Sergeant Jay Kaufman, who was from the Manville Police Department, who was also retired by this time, but would come back and essentially work on this case full time. These guys were pulled into it by a web sleuth, by someone that was poking around this case. And all of a sudden that re-raised the interest. These guys go looking, they pull up the evidence, and that's where we hear about this ring all of a sudden. So that's just a little bit of the magic that happens when you have people that care. It's one of those things. It's contagious. This person cared enough to make some calls, try to find some more information. All of a sudden, you've got a new detective on the case, and he's bringing a guy out of retirement for them to work on it. I mean, it's amazing. The first order of business was to take a closer look at the class ring. A jeweler confirmed it was a woman's ring. So we've got that cleared up. I know there's people, it seems like they're still talking about it on the threads. Woman's ring, size 9.5, had been upsized twice, was originally a 7.5. Now, the upsizing process would have wiped out any markings like initials that could have been engraved on the inside or school activities. Anything that was engraved on the inside would have basically been blown out during the upsizing process. Balfour, the ring's Austin-based manufacturer, did not have records from 1975, and that year's graduating class of Robert E. Lee High was about 650 students, meaning at least 300 girls. Now, 300 people, it's a lot of people, but that's not a task that is completely out of the scope of reality, trying to track down 300 women that live in that particular area, or actually that would have lived in that area at the time. Now, admittedly, marriages, name changes, people that have passed away is certainly going to impact that search, but it's a pretty good starting point, I think, having that list of 300 people. So these guys get on it. The new information gets publicized in those articles that I shared with you back in 2006, 2007, and that's when the online detectives really take off. And what do they start doing? A bunch of the same thing. They're looking through the yearbook. They're contacting people. They're sending snail mail, making phone calls, talking to people on Facebook, finding organizations that have to do with the alumni, the organizations that pull together the reunions. All of a sudden, they're just being lit up, not only by the investigators that are looking into this, but also essentially the web sleuths. And from what I can see in the threads, there's actually a pretty good relationship that's going on between the investigators that are working on this case and the web sleuths. I'm seeing several posts where they would reach out to these guys that are working on the case. The guys would give them a little bit of feedback, tell them they appreciate the help, and essentially keep going. So really cool to see that happening, particularly back in 2007. I mean, the whole landscape is different now when it comes to thinking of this kind of social media layer trying to help these cases. But back then, I think these detectives were great to be open to that help. And it probably was because of how this all started, because it was one of those web sleuths that actually helped ignite their interest in the case again. When Rosser reopened the Princess Blue case, they knew they had to talk to Tommy Tolson, the original investigator. By that time, the former Manville police chief had moved to Hallettsville, where he works as a truck driver. Kaufman and Rosser wanted to see if he might be able to tell them anything that had been left out of the original report. It was only a few paragraphs long and was never supplemented. So essentially, it seems like the investigation just wasn't picked up. Any supplemental reports should have been attached to that original report. So any follow-up actions that happened in terms of the investigation should have at least been in the original report, and there's nothing. If Tolson ever sketched or photographed the crime scene, that evidence has long disappeared. He did not appear to have interviewed anyone other than the motorist who found the remains. Really just seems like there wasn't a lot of footwork done on this. Tolson didn't have much to tell them. He said he's not interested in saying nothing, his wife Susan told the press. Nothing came of it, Susan Tolson says of the original investigation. She laughs when she says it, just like she laughs when she adds, they did what they could. The bottom line, Tommy Tolson cannot be bothered with this stuff. He's out in his rig trying to keep a schedule. He has to keep his mind on the road, she says. So the reason he sat on the single most important clue in the case remains a mystery. And by the way, I'm getting a little bit of a sense from this writer that he's really not happy with this turn, and I feel the exact same thing. What is this? You've got the investigators going out to talk to this guy. He doesn't really talk to them. You have the press following up. They can't even get in contact with this guy. You've basically got his wife running defense for him. What is going on here? And think back to how we started this video. NCIC information is detailed enough about every individual ring except for this one that didn't come out for 16 or 17 years. It really makes you think, is something weird at play here? Quote, I can't think of a reasonable explanation why the high school ring would not be put out there to the public, says Vernon Geberth, a consultant in homicide and forensic case investigations. If you guys listened to the first episode of 3 Men and a Mystery Season 2, you heard me quote Vernon Geberth. His book is literally just in arm's reach. It's known as the Bible of homicide investigation. I keep it here at my desk all the time. Even he's saying, why wouldn't you put out that information? This makes no sense. It's been a traditional practice in law enforcement to withhold information about the case so only you and the actual killer know what has happened, Geberth says. But if I have an unidentified body, my biggest quandary is the identification of the deceased, because I don't have a base for my investigation unless I know who I'm investigating. So he's just making a great point. Why wouldn't you release that information? You cannot progress this case without knowing who the victim is, because you've got to learn about the relationships and see who the possible suspects are, see who might have wanted to harm this person for some reason. You can't get to square one of this investigation without that identification happening. So when you have an item that's so identifiable, why didn't you put it out publicly? Talk about a brain scratch. I really don't know why this case went this way. And then that information, the way it actually comes out in that article, kind of bothers me a bit, just in terms of the only quotes they could really get are from his wife, and she's being kind of dismissive of the importance of the case. Continuing at abc13.com, this is an article from November 21st, 2019. So guess what? They're still working. They're still trying to do something with this case. There is a really good video that's attached to this. So look for the link for ABC 13 down below as well. The video is only about 7.5 minutes long, but you'll see several of the investigators that are working on the case. You'll see a bunch of different footage of the actual rings. But let's learn some of what comes out in that video. It would have been a perfect spot to dump a body because there was nothing out here, said Keith Traylor, the current chief of Manville Police. Matt Wingo was one of the first to show up. Wingo, now retired, was a deputy with the Brazoria County Sheriff's Office. I remember the tires. I remember her skull being under a tire. I remember her being disarticulated and everywhere, which is what it's going to be when you're out in the country, Wingo said. 16 years later, a curious detective literally reopened the evidence envelope and made a startling discovery. something previous detectives looked over. Among the rings collected was a class ring. The way that's phrased just really makes me want to shake my head, because especially coming off the article we just read where the author was being so clear about, hey, look, something feels wrong about this, about why didn't this ring come out? In this version, hey, they just looked it over. The most identifiable piece of jewelry, a custom piece of jewelry, just completely, they just missed it. And then the new guy that came 16 years later, oh yeah, he figured out there was something to that. There's no way. There's no way it was just missed. I don't know why it wasn't acted on, but there's no way that class ring was just, oh, this can't be important. Put it in the bag. I'm not buying it. Records of who bought a class ring in 1975 were long gone. That didn't stop detectives from tracking down more than half of the 650 students who graduated from Lee that year. Of course, we know they were probably aiming for the females, and more than half, it seems like they probably ran just about every lead that they could. Detective Anthony Michel and the other investigators agree. More than a decade after Princess Blue attracted attention from all over the country because of that class ring, Michel is tackling the case from a different perspective. He's focused on DNA. We're going to look at the facts. The class ring was found near the body, but we can't prove this class ring really had anything to do with this person, Michel said. Now, I don't know if Tolson actually made the original statement that the rings were found on the fingers, but I'm getting the sense here that Detective Michel is not sure if he should trust that analysis. He's basically saying at this point, I don't know if that ring's related to her at all. DNA, certainly a much stronger way to go about this. I wish that I was reading this story a year ago. I wish that they were running this DNA. I believe they might be working with Parabon before the lockdown that happened with GEDmatch. I don't know if GEDmatch still has policies that might allow it being used for unidentified searches, though. That's a possibility. I think that's a little different than the kind of murder cases that have been solved with it. So there might still be an in there, but I certainly wish I was reading this a year ago. I think it would have been a much easier search in terms of them using that DNA information to maybe trace the genealogy and figure out who this young woman was. Blue's bones are going back to a lab in Austin. Michel is hoping there's enough of it found for phenotyping. One of my hopes is that when we do this phenotyping and we get another sketch of this person, that someone may recognize her. That would be the ultimate, the best case scenario. And just to be clear with you guys, phenotyping is where they will essentially look at the DNA for certain indicators and they'll make a new digital composite sketch. You might have heard me talk about this on the channel before. I'm not the biggest fan of it because the digital sketches that come out, they look, and I'm really not trying to be sarcastic, but they look like just a hair better than a Sims character. They're extremely generic. I don't know if they're much more valuable than having an actual trained forensic artist like they've already done on this case, but it is typically a step in Parabon's process. They'll do the phenotyping first. They'll kick out what they call a snapshot, which is this new digital image. And then they will further evaluate the DNA to see if they could do the genealogy tracing, which is much stronger, a much better tool in my opinion. But one good thing about the snapshot product is whenever a police department runs this, it certainly creates a lot of press all of a sudden again. So I am looking forward to that hitting when they do release that, because I do think we'll see a bunch of articles on this case kind of flood the airwaves again, raise exposure again, and maybe that'll be what actually gets a person to make a phone call that might have the tip. But I don't know. I think the genealogy search is just such a stronger tool, and I hope that they get to that. Perhaps this is the path to get them there. Princess Blue was somebody's daughter, maybe somebody's sister or girlfriend. Somebody missed her. That's what keeps Michel and his team pushing forward. So I'm really trying not to drive a whole bunch of new attention towards this class of 75, but it's hard when you've got web sleuths that have access to such great resources. They literally have a website, lee75.org. They've got lists here of all their classmates that have passed away, classmates that they haven't been in contact with. Trust me, those lists have already been processed by web sleuths and probably processed time and time again. And keep in mind, you've got the investigators saying that they have processed all this too. It's not panning out for some reason. What is the reason for that? The only thing I can imagine is the person is deceased. So there's just no hope of using this as a resource for actually finding out who that person is, because you don't have anyone to say, oh, I'm the one with the missing ring. There is another possibility. If the person knows about this case, knows about Princess Blue, and doesn't want her identified, they're not going to step up either. Something is hindering this in terms of using the class of 75 as a resource. But it's so frustrating, because you could go to classmates.com right now and you could pull up their yearbook, and somewhere in this yearbook is a picture. I don't doubt it. There's a picture of the person that bought that ring in all of these pages that I'm scrolling through right now. And it's maddening. It's like the perfect storm to drive web sleuths crazy. You know the answer is here. It's in one of these tiny squares. We don't know who. And I don't know that there's any way, any mechanism to try to identify that person. It's there's literally people who have gone through with her composite sketch, compared it to every single person that's in this book, and have shared photos of, hey, you know, she looks a lot like this person that's in that book. But the truth is, we don't know if she's related to the person that bought the ring at all. So it's a little maddening when you have kind of such great resources in terms of technology here, and you know the answer is there, and you just can't get to it. As a matter of fact, look at this. Ring look familiar? This is the Balfour Company, the company that made that same ring, and they're doing an advertisement in the 1975 yearbook for their rings. It's maddening. It really is. And I can see why so many people have kicked into it and have tried to help. I mean, it's strange because we don't know a lot about her. We don't know about the conditions that led her to being discovered in that way. But you've got a huge community that cares about finding the truth, at least bringing her real name, and maybe some respect in terms of a decent burial. Right now, her remains are still an active part of the case, and just that's not going to happen until at least they identify who she actually is. I found a great Reddit thread on this. I found a bunch of great threads on this case, but some interesting consideration here. First comment from Pin Curls and Cute Girls. It's just a thought, but I wonder if the class ring is a red herring. Perhaps she could have gotten it from a vintage store or a secondhand shop and just liked the way it looked or what it symbolized. I think that's another frustrating aspect here. We don't know that it's really directly related to her, and there's no way to know until she's identified, basically. And then if someone could do the genealogy and go, oh, look, she had an aunt that went to that high school and graduated in 1975. There's just no way to know. I graduated from high school in 1991, says Nylon Knot. It was trendy then to wear your mother's class ring. The timeline could fit if her mother was a young mom. Certainly a good consideration. At Signed, she is not that far out of Houston and close to the same age I am. Houston at the time had a lot of street kids and runaways, both local and from other places. It was very grim scene, lots of drugs, prostitution, etc. There might be an aspect to that with this case as well. That's why I've tried to share the details with you guys. In particular, like about the dentistry thing, I think that might be an indicator of that. But without other personal effects that were found with her, there's just no way to really know for sure. Race Kerfuffle says maybe she was born in 1975, saw the ring in a thrift store and bought it because it was her birth year. Certainly a strong possibility. In the description box below, you'll also find a link to her entry at the Doe Network. I've got numerous web sleuths threads down there, including a breakdown on her dental records, kind of converted into layman's terms, which I really appreciate that they did that analysis. Also, a thread on cases submitted that can't be ruled out, which is pretty interesting to read. There's a lot of different cases where people have looked into missing persons cases and said, could this be her? Could this be her? So this thread is a list of cases they haven't been able to rule out. I can tell you on the NamUs record, you have to log in to see the exclusions. I actually did. There have been 5 people that have been excluded from being her. But Web Sleuths also has an alphabetical list of those ruled out. So you can check out that link down below as well. Princess Blue 2019, what can we do? It's kind of a newer conversation starting on this case. How can we help? Is there any new technology out there that can be used? And then jewelry clothing found with Princess Blue's remains, just another excellent thread. I've got already a bunch of other links down there for you guys to look at. Is this ring the key to breaking this case? It seems like investigators are moving away from it at this point. And I'll be very curious to see what happens with the DNA phenotyping, what we get from Snapshot in terms of that. Is it really going to be any more effective than the composite sketch that they've already put out? But if nothing else, hopefully it's a road to the better DNA product in my mind, the genealogy tracing. And maybe that will actually find Princess Blue's name and tell us about this, how this ring is connected to her. If it's even connected to her at all, I don't know at this point. Before I end today's video, I have several people to thank for PayPal donations. Randy Volkel, thank you so much. Jennifer Dixon, Jordan Betts, and Gray Hughes. Gray actually asked if he could use my episode of BrainScratch that I did on the Adrian Quintal case on his channel. He wanted to kind of do a almost like a reaction style video to it. So I let him do it just because I thought it would be helpful to the case. And then he was nice enough to, I guess, raise some money through tips and stuff while he was doing his live stream and decided to kick some of that over to the channel. So I really appreciate that. Thought it was cool of Gray. And I appreciate anyone's help in terms of trying to raise exposure to these cases. Speaking of which, share this video. Let's get some more eyes, ears, and hearts open to the story of Princess Blue. Someone out there has the information. If that's you, there's contact details in the description box below. Please use it. Please send it in. And maybe we could put this mystery to rest. Also, just wanted to end this video by saying my hat's off to these investigators that are carrying the torch of this case. And I really wish we could get some better answers from Tolson. I'm just kind of mind blown at that whole thing. How did that ring disappear for so long? And then it's like we're behind the game. You know, it comes out 16 years later. Are we going to be able to make use of it to identify her? I think we're going to have to just keep tabs on it and see. Have a great weekend, everyone. Take care. I'll see you back here on Monday with a brand new episode of Case Cracked. Also, a quick reminder, next week is Thanksgiving here in the States. No BrainScratch next week, but we will be back the week after that. I'll still have Case Cracked and Searchlight for you guys next week. Take care, everyone. I'll see you on Monday on the Lord and Arts channel.